another day. Not literally fight, but, you know, they live on. But for the other Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia and all the countries around the Gulf, if for the sake of argument there is some kind of deal which leaves the Iranian regime in place, albeit weakened militarily, that maybe just puts off for 5 years or 10 years or whatever the possible resurgence of Iran. But for Iran, the regime, they want to stay in power at all costs. And I suspect they are willing to give up for now to this administration, the Trump administration, quite a lot to ensure that they do remain in place.
My one quick final question to you, that when it comes to, again, I'm circling back to the Strait of Hormuz, that's where I think a lot of conversations have come down to. Brent prices have cooled off, are in fact below the $100 mark as we speak. That, of course, being a knee-jerk reaction to what we've seen coming in from the Post on social media. Again, I ask that question, that how will the oil markets factor for more certainty when it comes to oil flowing through the Strait of Hormuz? Because that is what is the big talking point.
Well, what we may see, even in this window we have of 5 days, is that will some ships move through, which currently are not able to do so. If we see in the next 5 days some ships, obviously it won't be an enormous number, but some ships that wouldn't otherwise have gone through before this announcement go through the strait, that may be a harbinger of what may come at the end of this 5-day period if there is some kind of agreement. So I think we're going to look at the strait and see if there's any change to the movements that we've seen in the last couple of weeks.
Ms. Atkinson, I'd like to thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure hosting you. But let's continue this conversation. Also with us is Mr. Sanjeev P. Yadav. He's the co-founder and CEO of the Banyan Tree. Mr. Yadav, thank you for joining us. First questions, your quick thoughts on this post by Donald Trump on Truth Social, saying that there are talks that are underway and there will be a postponement of strikes against civilian infrastructure. Again, the question that many of our analysts, many of our guests are asking, that is this credible? Will this hold?
Yeah, no, I think obviously the markets are responding. We can see it very positively. Oil futures are responding positively, but I think this was a follow-on of Iran and the regime, or whoever is in power currently, getting a sense that it's game over. And how is this going to end? And how is it going to end in a way that can allow the regime to retain some power or power itself? We've seen global momentum shift in the last week in terms of the telltale signs of the Europeans starting to send resources, the Arab states, including the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, expelling diplomats. So the on-the-ground signals were already telling us that the momentum has been shifting. American forces have been operating with Apache helicopters over Iranian airspace. So I think the broader signals have been there, and Trump's tweet of a 48-hour deadline was a signal of kind of this return almost to Jacksonian foreign policy for America, which is a very almost aggressive stance. And I think the Iranian response that we can assume has been happening with back channels has been a signal about how can they retain power? How can they find an off-ramp themselves with this conflict in order to maintain some level of power? So I'm going to assume that the coming days will see some concessions in these talks that have given signals about the missile program, missile development, the missile arsenal, and then obviously the nuclear program. So I think it's a wait and see over the next 5 days in terms of where this goes. But I think the pressure is really on the regime now in terms of where do they kind of find their own off-ramp. I think the narrative has been, where does the president of the United States and the administration find an off-ramp for themselves? But I think in many ways for the regime, they're trying to figure out how they survive, having been completely, for the most part, eliminated at the top levels of the political leadership.
Well, speaking of the Iranian perspective, Mr. Yadav, I just want to get your thoughts. The initial commentary, again, which is visible on social media coming out from Iran, appears to be pointing towards how Trump has backtracked, Trump has retreated, how this is a case of tackle, which, of course, is expected. But then again, does that corroborate, does that increase the challenge for the regime to find an off-ramp, to give an exit, especially as far as Hormuz is concerned?
Well, I think the pressure is on the regime to find those necessary steps to, in essence, find that off ramp. Because at the end of the day, while there are domestic pressures in the United States for the administration and the president, the Americans are net energy exporters. They can survive much better than the Europeans or the Asians. A short-term closure of the Straits of Hormuz. Obviously, there's going to be inflationary pressures that will impact the US. But I think the pressure is really on the Iranians, and I think any American efforts to attack um, energy facilities, power grids, and which would have triggered some sort of response from the Iranians against the Arab states would have, in essence, brought the other Arab states that have shown restraint thus far into this conflict. So I think you're seeing a regime that is backed up against the wall and really under immense pressure to find some way out to preserve power, because all these signals are now showing that the global momentum is behind the American effort into Iran. And I think always look at the actions, right? Not the words or the rhetoric. And if you look at the European actions and the actions of the Arab states in the last few days, it's clear everyone was now under the impression going forward that the tide had turned for the Americans in this conflict. So I think the pressure sits with the Iranian regime to find a navigable path out of this.
Well, we've also got Sandeep Prasad with us from DC. Sandeep, many thanks for joining us. We're discussing what to make of President Trump's post on Truth Social. We've also been pointing out that we haven't had any official reaction coming in either from Iran or Israel. But how lasting, do you believe this 5-day window could be? Could this be the start of a ceasefire, lasting ceasefire?
I think it can be. I think there's potential signals, but I think the concern is the Iranians in the past have not been willing to make those grand concessions in terms of its missile program, um, let alone a full removal of the nuclear program. So it is surprising that it appears that there might be some concessions that have been put on the table. I think the challenge is really going to be if they're fully willing to do that. Obviously, survival is survival instinct, and the necessities of survival for the regime are critical at this time. So um, perhaps that is the tide that is turning. But I think I don't expect that in 5 days we'll see a full ceasefire. Um, but potentially an extension of the current state may that the administration and the Americans are seeing.
Yes, I mean, if there have been talks, and according to President Trump, the talks have been productive, then I would imagine that they may have extracted some concessions from the Iranians for President Trump to have posted what he did, but one doesn't know. We'll have to wait to see if there is any more information that comes in from the White House. But Stephen, coming back to you now, purely as far as the energy markets are concerned, look, if this holds even for 5 days, if Iran were to allow safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, what are we talking about? We've seen force majeures being announced by virtually every energy company at this point in time. Just to get back some semblance of normalcy in the energy markets, if this were to hold, how long will it take?
I don't I don't think 95 to 100 is normalcy in the energy markets. It's a high price to pay. It's going to